Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy this content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
We need to talk about where the Mets actually stand right now because there's a lot of noise out there, and some of it is completely irrational. David Stearns is under pressure, and there are literally people showing up at Citi Field with signs saying "Fire Stearns." Most of them misspelling his name because they can't be bothered to add the second E. But let's take a breath here and actually think about what's happening instead of just reacting emotionally to every single thing. Stearns knows this roster isn't finished. Of course he knows that. You don't think he's aware there are holes at starting pitcher, outfield, and potentially first base. He's not sitting in his office thinking everything is perfect and the team is ready to compete as currently constructed. But there's this segment of the fan base that thinks the offseason is over and done and nothing else is coming. That's just not reality. There's still time and there are still players available. Here's the thing about Stearns that people need to understand. His track record in Milwaukee was building competitive teams every single year with a fraction of the payroll he has in New York. People say he only does just enough to be competitive, but never enough to win a championship. Okay, let's unpack that criticism because it's lazy. First, he was working with Milwaukee money, which is nowhere close to what Steve Cohen is willing to spend. Second, winning a championship is incredibly difficult. The Dodgers are the Dodgers, and then there's everyone else. They defer money on basically every contract and operate in ways no other team can replicate. Acting like building a championship roster is easy, and Stearns just refuses to do it, is absurd. What Stearns did in Milwaukee was consistently field playoff caliber teams with limited resources. He developed talent, made smart trades, and maximized value everywhere he could. Now he's in New York with significantly more financial flexibility. The expectation should be that he builds on what he learned in Milwaukee and creates something sustainable here. That doesn't happen overnight, especially when you're tearing down a core and rebuilding the roster personality from scratch. And speaking of tearing down the core, let's address the elephant in the room that keeps coming up. There's this ridiculous narrative floating around that Francisco Lindor and his politics somehow drove Brandon Nimmo, Pete Alonso, Jeff McNeil, and Edwin Diaz out of town. This might be one of the dumbest things I've ever heard repeated by grown adults. Let me break down why each of those guys are gone, and it has nothing to do with Lindor or his wife or any clubhouse drama you're imagining. Brandon Nimmo got moved because of his contract and because the front office didn't view him as a leader worth building around long term. He's on the wrong side of 30, and his body's already breaking down with injuries. That's a baseball decision, not a personality conflict. Pete Alonso wanted a massive contract extension. The Mets weren't willing to give him because paying a first baseman who's eventually going to be a full-time DH $155 million doesn't make sense for roster construction. Jeff McNeil, literally nobody in baseball wanted. The Mets needed to get his contract off the books and barely managed to do it. Edwin Diaz wanted to go to the Dodgers to chase another ring. If you think Lindor's wife posting on social media drove Diaz to Los Angeles, you need professional help. David Stearns wanted to move on to a new era with a different clubhouse dynamic and roster construction. That's what he's doing. Whether it works or not remains to be seen, but acting like there's some grand conspiracy involving Lindor running people out of town is embarrassing. Give the man a chance to finish building this roster before you start screaming for his head. So what can he actually do to improve this team? Let's talk about realistic options because there are still quality players available. Ranger Suarez is one name that hasn't gotten nearly enough attention this offseason. He's a left-handed starter with legitimate playoff success. Over 8 playoff starts in his career, he has a 1.48 ERA. That's not a small sample size fluke. That's a guy who elevates his game when it matters most. He helped Philadelphia win a pennant. He knows how to pitch in big moments. The issue with Suarez is he's represented by Scott Boras, which means the asking price has probably been astronomical. That's why his market has been quiet. Boras is asking for the world, and teams are waiting for the number to come down. If Suarez gets to 3 years, around $25 million per season, with some deferrals similar to what Sean Manaea got, the Mets should absolutely be interested. He gives you a proven lefty in a rotation that's currently loaded with righties. Jet Williams, Nolan McLean, Brandon Sproat, Clay Holmes, all right-handed. David Peterson only has 1 year left on his deal and might get traded anyway. Adding Suarez gives you balance and playoff experience, which this roster desperately needs. Kyle Tucker is the other name that keeps dominating the conversation. His market has been weird, and there's speculation it could come down to a high average annual value on a short-term deal instead of a long-term commitment. Something like 3 years, $125 million. If that happens, the Mets should absolutely be in on it, even though I'm not as high on Tucker as most people seem to be. Tucker is a really good player, don't get me wrong. He's 29 years old, won a World Series with Houston, been to the playoffs multiple times, has 9 postseason home runs. He can steal 30 bases and hit 20 to 30 homers while getting on base at a high clip. He's never struck out more than 100 times in a season, which the Mets front office will love. Career .358 on-base percentage, and he posted a .408 OBP last season. He does a lot of things well, and he's a Gold Glove caliber defender in right field. But here's my concern, and it's a legitimate one. Can he handle New York? Tucker has spent his entire career in Houston, which is a completely different media market and pressure environment than what he'd face in New York. Some guys thrive under that microscope, and some guys crumble. We don't know which category Tucker falls into, and that's a risk when you're talking about paying someone $40 million per year. At 3 years, though, yeah, I'd probably take that risk because the upside is too high to pass up. Honestly, I like Cody Bellinger more than Tucker for this team. Bellinger has the moxie, the winning pedigree, the consistency over a longer career. He's proven he can handle big markets, having played in Los Angeles his entire career. He's also probably going to cost significantly less than Tucker, which matters when you're trying to balance a payroll and fill multiple holes. But if Tucker is available on a 3-year deal, the Mets should seriously consider it because you're getting an elite talent without the long-term risk. The first base situation is still unresolved, and honestly, I'm not sure the Mets have a great plan there either. Right now, it looks like Simeon Polano is going to get most of the starts with Mark Vientos as the primary DH. That's fine, but is it optimal? I don't think so. Vientos is a one-dimensional player who can hit but doesn't offer much else. He's not a great defender. He's got limited positional flexibility. He doesn't run well. The Mets are trying to move away from guys like that toward players who bring versatility and multiple skills. They need to figure out if they can trade Vientos while his value is still relatively high. Maybe you package him for Luis Robert from the White Sox. Maybe you include him in a deal for a starting pitcher or reliever. Maybe you flip him for a true first baseman who fits what the team is trying to build. Whatever the answer is, keeping Vientos as a full-time DH on a roster that's trying to prioritize defense and speed and flexibility doesn't make a ton of sense long-term. David Stearns' job is to balance all these competing priorities. He needs to find starting pitching, outfield help, and possibly first base upgrades. He needs to maintain roster flexibility and positional versatility. He needs switch hitters who can change the complexion of lineups. He needs clubhouse leaders with playoff experience. And he needs to do all this while building a completely new team personality from the ground up. That's not a simple task, and it's not going to happen in 6 weeks during the offseason. People need to be patient and let this play out before declaring the offseason a disaster. Yeah, the roster looks rough right now. Yeah, there are obvious holes that need filling, but there's still time and there are still quality players available. Ranger Suarez could give you a frontline lefty with playoff credentials. Kyle Tucker could give you an elite bat and defender for 3 years without long-term risk. There are other moves to be made in trades and on the margins with depth pieces. The pressure is absolutely on Stearns to deliver. He had a mediocre offseason last year outside of landing Juan Soto. The trade deadline was rough, but he also presided over a farm system rebuild that has the Mets sitting with a top 5 system in baseball right now. That matters for long-term sustainability. So he's 1 for 2 in his time as Mets president of baseball operations. This offseason is the tiebreaker. If he whiffs and the team misses the playoffs, there will absolutely be serious questions about his job security. But if he nails this and builds a competitive roster that makes a playoff run, everyone will forget about the rough patches along the way. The Lindor stuff from yesterday needed to be addressed because people were getting out of control with conspiracy theories and attacking his family. That's not okay, and it needed to be called out. But we're moving on from that now and focusing on what actually matters, which is building a roster that can compete in 2026. There's still work to do, and Stearns knows it. Let's see what he does over the next few weeks before we grab the pitchforks. The pieces are still out there to make this work, but the clock is ticking and moves need to happen soon.